Cuban culture in general, right? Very hardworking people, very driven, very entrepreneurial, you know. So, in fact, people like to say Miami is what it is today because of, you know, in portion, right? You know, there's been a lot of immigration from a lot of the states and abroad, but the Cuban influx in the 60s really kind of lit Miami on fire. And that would have been Havana, right? If people had not come over here. And what I like to say, a couple of years ago, I went to Cartagena in Colombia on the coast.
Mm.
And to me, that would have been what Havana would have been today. It has Cartagena has a historic city, and then it has the amazing skyscrapers, 40, 50-story skyscrapers adjacent to the historic city. So all of that energy came to Miami with the Cuban entrepreneurs, you know, that lit up Miami.
All right, let's get into it. So, Rick, all I'm asking you, like, stay close, you know, talk to the mic.
Okay.
It's going to be an important thing. So we're going to have open conversation about the process of building a business, family, ups and downs.
Yes.
I know a lot of people get into business and they don't really get to hear the real part of building a business. And, you know, in the process. So today we have Rick Gonzales. Are you the second?
I'm a junior.
You're a junior?
Junior.
Okay. Let's get into it, Rick. So Rick is the owner of REG
Architects. Yeah, that's
Architects.
it. Mm-hmm.
I actually had an experience where I hired him when I hired the firm to help build Cafe Hub, the cafe I used to own. So I want to start from the beginning, Rick. Born and raised where?
I was born in Cuba. My parents are Cubans, and they left with me as a baby when I was 3 months old in a suitcase from Havana.
Okay.
When Cuba turned communist with Castro back in 1961.
Mm-hmm.
And raised in Miami most of my life. Then my dad was an architect too. He was my former partner. And he took a stint in Costa Rica doing projects in the 70s.
Wow.
So I did high school in Costa Rica. And then when I came back in the early 80s, I went to college up in DC, Catholic University. And then in 85, I graduated and I came back to I love South Florida. I miss South Florida. It's too cold up north.
Right.
But I didn't want to go to Miami. I felt there was not a lot of opportunities. I've always been entrepreneurial spirit. My father had his own business. And so I thought, where can I go in South Florida where I could be, at the time, I used to say a big fish in a small pond versus a small fish in a big pond in Miami, right? So I landed here in West Palm in 1985. And 3 years later, in 1988, I opened up REG Architects with my dad. He was working with another company. I asked him to join me and help me launch our company.
So before we get all the way in, I want to talk about your upbringing. So growing up, when your parents came to this country, was it with you and your siblings or just?
At the beginning, it was just me. Believe it or not, I have 6 siblings, 3 brothers and 3 sisters.
Wow.
So I'm the oldest of 7. We did live in Atlanta for a short while. My brother Ed was born there. And then we moved quickly to Miami, where he worked for several architects before opening up his own business.
So he's in the business also?
He was in the business too, yes. So he had his own business, architectural business, back in the late 60s and early 70s.
Mom and dad in the home?
Dad passed away a month and a half ago.
No, before. I'm talking about the beginning. Yeah.
Well, yes.
Yeah, don't go there yet. I'm gonna save. I want to know more at the beginning.
Yes. Dad. Yes. My mom. In fact, they worked together. My mom would help him with the bookkeeping.
Wow.
And help him with the front office.
How was it growing up in a home with entrepreneurs?
It was pretty interesting. You know, they worked hard and late sometimes. I remember fondly growing up in Miami. On Flagler, there was an after-school program. Very interesting program because it was a place that church-related, but they taught about for immigrants, they taught about the history and the culture and of Cuba. So we'd go there like from 3 to 6. And sometimes it was 6:30, 7, and they'd pick us up late, and we'd be one of the last ones because they were working. So but always, always there for us, always taking care of us, which is important.
The pride that you guys, I know a lot of prideful Cubans. When you guys moved to Miami, was that pride still there, or is that a normal thing for Cuban culture?
It's interesting, right? I think Cuban culture in general, right? Very hardworking people. Very driven, very entrepreneurial, So, in fact, people like to say Miami is what it is today because of, in portion, right? There's been a lot of immigration from a lot of the states and abroad, but the Cuban influx in the 60s really kind of lit Miami on fire. And that would have been Havana, right? If people had not come over here. And what I like to say, a couple of years ago, I went to Cartagena in Colombia, on the coast. And to me, that would have been what Havana would have been today. It has Cartagena has a historic city, and then it has the amazing skyscrapers, 40, 50-story skyscrapers adjacent to the historic city. So all of that energy came to Miami with the Cuban entrepreneurs, that lit up Miami.
How was that growing up to see the community? Was it a lot of coming together? Was a lot of building? Like how was the community in Miami growing up?
I thought it was an interesting change in perspective, right? Because you come from a different culture, a different language. So you come to Miami as I did my schooling, my middle school, early school in downtown. We lived on the roads section of Miami in a little small Catholic school, St. Peter and St. Paul, kind of like the one that used to be here in Riviera Beach, and they would help you acclimate to the culture, English, Cubans, we love baseball, so back then we were the little O's for the Baltimore Orioles. There was no team in Miami back then. So we would follow my grandfather, my dad and I would follow the little Orioles and go to their games in the old beat up stadium in downtown Miami. And then slowly learning other new things like, the Miami Dolphins, right? Learning about football and being now a fan for 50 years, but those were the things that you got used to, but you still had, your Cuban culture, the music, the food, Calle Ocho. We lived near there. We lived on 17th and 8th Street is the Calle Ocho. So a lot of the flavor was still there embedded in the Miami community.
So with your father, did he practice architectural design all the way in Cuba or when he got here?
Well, yes. Very interesting. My son Ricardo and I, we wrote his obituary when he passed away a couple of months ago, and we looked into some of the history. And for example, he went to, believe it or not, Villanova had opened a school in Havana. And it closed right as Fidel took over the country. So my dad, there was only 2 classes that graduated from that university in Havana. Now you could go to Philadelphia, right, and go to school up there. But and he got a prize. He was one of the top students, and at the time he got a prize and a trip to South America in the late 50s when, for example, Brazil had just built their modern city, Brasilia, which is the capital of Brazil. And you think about that, what a trip, a young architect, young guy, 21, 22 years old, going to a place like Brasilia, brand new, an amazing modern city in the jungle, learning about that. He went to Argentina, Colombia. It was a really nice trip. And then he came back and he got offered a nice job in what you would call the equivalent of HUD here, with urban development across the country in Cuba. But the government was changing. And I'll never forget this. He told this to me many times before he passed away. He said, I have a great opportunity in this country, but if I stay here, the government will take you when you're 5 years old, and start working on your mind and in schooling and reprogram you as a communist. And I don't want you or any of my other children, to lose freedom. We cherish freedom here in America. We live in the greatest country in the world. And so because of the fears of freedom, he took a great job. He left it and he brought my mom and I, and we came to the States,
This show is, it's all about the hustle, the grind that to get to from one point to another. Speak a little bit about the hustle that you saw your father, because it sounded like he hustled a lot.
He hustled a lot. He was a very talented architect too. He old school, draw by hand, and the renderings, the perspectives, in color, beautiful. In fact, he used to do watercolors and beautiful paintings as a hobby too, and very hard worker. At one point, he had a partner that also did construction. So back in the day, in the late '60s, early '70s, they would build little 2-story apartment buildings in Miami, Opelika, Miami, off of Coral Gables, and that was a little thriving business that he had. He had by the time he left for Costa Rica in 1973, he had 6 employees. And he sold the business to the top 2 guys in the office. And then he moved with this multinational company down to Costa Rica for 7 years.
So also, I'm assuming he's the one that inspired you to be an architect, or was it really a passion that you had from the beginning?
It's very interesting. I remember, well, it was a passion. I actually like 2 things. I loved architecture, and growing up doing high school in Costa Rica, I loved nature. So at one point I thought I wanted to be like a marine biologist, because I love the ocean and I love to go fishing and be in the water and all that. But I ended up with architecture because I really loved it. I remember my dad designed a very modern house in a historic neighborhood in Miami in the late '60s, and he designed it with an office up front. So we lived in the back, and there was a little office. So we'd sneak into the office and grab the markers and the paper.
Right.
And so I got the bug, of architecture back then as a young kid, 12 years old.
Right. And growing, you say you did high school in Costa Rica. What is the experience in Costa Rica like?
Oh my God. Well, back in the '70s, it was an amazing place. It was not, it was very small, a place, very lush, beautiful mountains. The valley, Central Valley, is where people live and work, most of the people. But within a couple of hours, you could be on the Atlantic Ocean or you could be in the Pacific Ocean. So there's many places we used to, we do some surfing, we go camping, a lot of outdoor activities, beautiful place. In fact, 1/3 of the country is protected by national parks. So they're one of the greenest places in the planet.
Was there somewhere you think you'd retire one day?
Well, my wife is Colombian, so Colombia is another beautiful country, right? So, and so is North Carolina. I've got an affinity. We like to go camping there every year. We've been going up there for 20 years in the summer. And so I think South Florida will always be my main home, my HQ. But maybe visit up to North Carolina or Colombia or Costa Rica. Yeah, that would be fun.
So you decided after high school, you guys moved back to the States?
That's right. So we moved back to the States. I did a stint. I did a little bit of college 1 year in Guatemala. I went up to Guatemala to check architecture.
Wait. So Cuba,
yeah,
the United States, Atlanta, Costa Rica, Guatemala. Anything else?
Well, then I got back to 1 year, and then I got back to Miami, and I went to Miami-Dade College. It was a state college. It was a junior college back then. It's a nice state college now. It's really grown immensely over the last.
So before you go there, like, why was traveling? Was it that you guys travel so much?
Well, architects, we love to travel. We love to go look at historic. In my case, particular, I love to go see historic places.
But you guys end up moving there.
Yeah,
it seems like it wasn't just going and coming back. It was going and staying.
Yes. Okay. So in Costa Rica, we left. My parents left for Miami because there was another communist intrusion next door in Nicaragua. So the workflow kind of slowed down to almost nothing. So they said, let's go back to Miami. And here we go again, starting up again a third time. And
how was that for you, though? Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, that was painful. He had built another beautiful house in Costa Rica. We had a beautiful split level house and creek and monkeys in the backyard. I mean, it was a very amazing place. And he had to let go of that and let go of his little business that he was building in Costa Rica because with the threat of the civil war in Nicaragua, architecture kind of came to a complete stop. And so they went to Miami, and I went to Guatemala to study for a year.
Like,
I thought
what made, how did that?
Because before the Nicaragua situation, I had graduated from high school, and the best school for architecture, the Harvard of Central America, was called the American University in Guatemala. So I applied there, I got in. And so I said, yeah, I want to go to the best school in Central America. And I moved to Guatemala for a year.
So, all right. So Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's great. But so tell me a little bit more about college. How was that college experience?
Well, let's see. So Guatemala, like similar to Costa Rica, a little different because they're more their government back then was more of a semi-military type government. You know, a lot of that happens in South America. But beautiful country too. You know, volcanoes. They also have pyramids up in the northern Quetzal, the northern section of the country, and they have spectacular beaches on the Pacific side too. So a lot of hard work. You know, you had to study a lot. Had a little bit of funds that I get from my parents to help me every month. So manage money carefully. You know, to make sure you have enough to cover your expenses, and work hard, study hard. You know, and it was a great experience for a year. A lot of because my parents moved to Miami, and because the government was starting to also get some issues with left-leaning guerrillas and things like that. I decided to move back to Florida in 1980.
And then did you finish school? You said you also went to D.C. for
Yes. So I got 2 degrees in Washington, D.C. I went up there in 1982 after being at Miami-Dade for a year and a half. And I got a degree in a Bachelor of Science in Architecture, and then a professional degree in architecture from Catholic University in 1985.
And did you work for any firms before?
Yes, I did. So it's interesting. Back in when I moved in 1980, my dad was working again with his old firm, and I did a little bit of internship there. Worked a little bit with him. I worked with a wonderful interior designer, a guy named Dennis Jenkins in 1982, 1981, who did the interior design for, back in the day, Southeast Bank in downtown Miami, Southeast Tower, which is the one with the little cutout corners, one of the original skyscrapers in Miami. And that was a lot of fun, a lot of learning there before I moved to D.C. And in D.C., I also had a part-time job, you know, because you know, with 6 brothers and sisters, right? And my parents, you know, struggling with a small business, I had to find, you know, everything, you know, grants, student loans. I had a little part-time job drawing in an architectural office in downtown Washington. Interesting side story. At the time, this firm, I forget the name of the firm, but they were well known for designing subways, like the metro system in DC. They were doing the one for Baghdad, Iraq. So it's kind of cool, you know, years later, right?
Right.
Working on the little, you know, bathroom and stair details for these major subway system designed from a firm in Washington. So really interesting mix of experience with small firms and bigger firms as I went through school and got my education. So
after school, what was next for you?
Well, I knew, interesting story. I'm on a platform waiting for the train. It's February. And
which was cold.
Which is cold already. And I've got all the winter clothes I can wear, right? Layers and everything. On the platform, there's this beautiful sign that says, come to Florida.
Right there and then,
it was 17-degree Beethoven. It was so freaking cold. I said, you know what? I'm going back home, you know? And I got some nice job offers, RTKL, which was a big firm in Baltimore. I got a nice job there offered, and another one in Washington. But I really wanted to come home. I really wanted, since day one, I wanted to have my own practice, work with my dad.
You believe because of what you saw your father doing automatically made you feel like I want to own something?
Yes. Yes. Even though it was hard and there were ups and downs, our business is very roller coaster. Like, you know, it's not steady. It goes up and down. I did want to come back. I wanted to get experience. So I got a job in North Palm Beach, my first job, for about a year and a half. And then I got a job in West Palm for another year and a half. And then after 3 years, I was making contacts, you know, business development through Sunfest. When I first got here in 1985, I volunteered in Sunfest. And it's very true what they say, you know, if you volunteer and you give to the community gives back to you.
Speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, that's my mantra. I've always practiced that, you know. So we do either a lot of nonprofit work. We did the Martin Luther King Memorial in West Palm Beach, and a lot of other work for different agencies and nonprofits and participate in boards. And it always, you know, I mean, you do it because you love it. You don't expect anything back, but it's interesting how it always.
The more you give,
it's amazing. It really is true. The more you give back. In my 30. I've been at it now for 34 years at REG, and it really does come back. You know, so it's really. I love this community. It's my home now. I've been here for 37 years. That's more than half of my lifetime, right? So Palm Beach County is a great place to be involved in the community, you know?
So one thing that I'm noticing that your father worked hard and always had some reason he had to move to another level.
Yes.
Started from Cuba.
Yes.
And he had the same thing in Costa Rica. And then was that part of the reason you believe you wanted to come together with him and hold him down and build his family business?
In a way, yes. It's funny you say that because I after college, I was done. I was tired of moving around. So I really wanted to find a place, stick a place where I could just live. I remember looking at West Palm and saying, okay, it's 2 hours from West Palm. You know, do this half a circle, right? And you can get up to Fort Pierce and down to Homestead and west to maybe even Orlando, right? So it was a good center of work.
Only an architect look at it like this.
Like that, right?
Only you guys. My goodness.
Right. And for work opportunity and having the bug of, my dad loved historical buildings too. And having that bug, you know, for historical places. I mean, imagine going to school as a young guy in Washington, D.C., right? There's so many historical buildings. There's such great planning, urban planning. I mean, the city's an amazing place. In fact, I had to pick between Catholic U, UF, and Notre Dame. Notre Dame was, you know, great school, but it was very isolated. UF was
cold also.
Very cold. UF was a great school, but in Gainesville. And I thought, you know, my mom was kind of like saying, you know, you should go to the bigger place, you know, because it's got urban planning and it's got historic. So I owe a lot to my mom for my education. All along, she always guided me to take the better choice in terms of educational opportunities, you know, so I followed through with that.
Was she highly educated or just?
Yeah, well, yes. My dad got his degree, but my mom, because of what happened in Cuba, she was 1 semester away from graduating as an accountant.
But education was still super important.
Yes, always. In fact, another thing she said to me once when I was like 12 or 13 years old, she said to me, you know, Rick, we've lost everything in Cuba, but the one thing that they could not take away from us was what's inside our head, what's in our mind, what we learn, our education. And that's why you hear a lot of moms, right? You know, Hispanic moms, African-American moms, every mom, right? Saying, get an education, son, get an education, daughter, because, you know, it's very true. They can't take that away from you. And that made an impression on me as a young, you know, middle schooler. I said, well, okay, I'll study hard. Empowerment, right? Study hard, go to a tougher all boys high school with a lot of, you know, like prep school where I had to study harder than my friends, you know, but it set me up for college and for work.
So I want to go back to your father. When you came down back home,
yes,
your father still had his business. When you said, I want to know a little bit more about how important that was to you.
Okay, so all right, so he came back from Costa Rica in 1980 to Miami, and he was down there for about 3 years. Out of serendipity, he got a job in West Palm. There was a company hiring. I forget the name of the firm. It was an Italian architect here in town, and he got that they needed a senior designer, so he came. He commuted, and I had an aunt that lived in West Palm,
hustling.
So he would come, man. He would drive up Mondays, you know, work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and spend 2 nights at my aunt's house. And Thursday late, he'd go back down to Miami, and he did that for a couple of years. Actually, more. He did it for 4 years, so 84 till 88, and then he was also.
First of all, 1 second. Yep. How do you remember all these years? Like, you're like spitting them out like 84, 82, 85. Like, wow, those are memorable years, man. I'm impressed. But sorry to cut you off, but go ahead.
I guess in part Beethoven because, you know, he passed away 2 months ago. And my son Ricardo and I worked on his obituary. And so you go back and you think, you know, and you.
That's how you start remembering.
You know what I'm saying? You go back and look at the history. History is what connects us all. You know, it's our history of family, our history of place. You know, and it's important to go back to history, right? Because you learn from it, the past,
absolutely.
You apply it to the present, and you hope for a better future, right? So,
so that's my last. I'm cutting you off. I wanted you to finish the business with your dad.
So okay, so
I'm not gonna cut you off no more.
He was working. He was working for this other firm. Oh, Salamone and Associates. Pat Salamone was the guy's name, and he that guy retired. He left town. He was working at FAU. In their architecture department where they supervise you know, FAU's grown 3 decades, right? So supervising the new buildings. He loved that job. He was there for quite a while and hustling like myself. We were both part-time adjunct teachers at Palm Beach State College. I was teaching a design class and he was teaching perspective, how to draw at a time, you know, and making a little bit of money there so that we could then start our own business. So that would take care of giving us a little bit of basic money, you know, to get us going. Because we started REG with no money. We had a little office space. Remember a wonderful guy, and a guy named Granny Webb and Paul Warner, who had Touchstone Webb Realty. They're still around. Susan Thomas runs the agency. And he rented us a little office, maybe twice the size of your space over here. And just to get us up and running back in 1988. And we were there for a little while. Then Tom said, hey, I've got a building on Clematis Street, the Como building, and there's a space available on the second floor. And we took that space. And
what year you guys moved
That
down?
was late 1988, early 1989.
So how was that feeling that you had when you first started this firm with your father?
It was exciting. You know, we had to build we built all the furniture like you got over here, right? So you built all the space. He was always quiet and dedicated to the drafting, to the drawing. And I like to do some drawings, but I also like to do marketing, you know, and go meet people. So we met also through the real estate company. We would get some leads from them. So hustle, go get the leads, go talk to people. You know, really early on back then, I mean, I was 27, I looked 17. So trust me, having my dad in his mid-50s, you know, with me made a big difference, because people would look at me and go, you're just a kid. There's this kid here, you know? And I'm like, no, we can draw it. Seriously, look, I've got
look, I got the old man with me.
I got an aircraft carrier right here, right? He can do anything you want to do, right? Which was true. He could draw anything you wanted to draw, Beethoven. The man was really, really, really talented. And that's how we started. You know, the early years, 88, 89. I mean, we moved to Clematis Street when at 5 o'clock, you had to go get your car and get the hell out of there, because it was a dangerous place.
It's a different place.
It's a different place. The women had to be escorted to their cars, and there was nothing after 5. I mean, there was like a tumbleweed down the street. You know, it's just...
Wow, to see where it's at now, that had to be unbelievable.
The 90s? So you're talking 30 years ago. You know, it didn't really start hopping until 92, 93. That's when the first couple of buildings got renovated. And then Nancy Graham became the mayor, a strong mayor. The change in government helped a lot the city. And look at it now, right? It's just booming, and it's all up, right? Even Riviera Beach, we're busy up here, and Lake Park, and all the way up to Jupiter, right? It's an amazing time to be in Palm Beach County.
So what's some of the changes, like with the business, when you guys first got started in the business, what was some of the ups and downs, you know, the trial and error that you guys went through? Because it's not easy just running the business.
It isn't, right? You have to, you really have to pursue things. I remember doing some of the private work. A friend of mine, a mentor, said, you should go get some public work too. And I was like, oh, yeah. And I was like, you know, well, why? You know, and he worked for the county, Dean Ellis, retired architect. And he said, because the private side sometimes stops, you know, because of recessions and things like that. And the public work, you know, usually keeps moving, you know. So that was great advice. Today, about 40% of our business is public work. So we do a lot of school board work for Palm Beach County, do work for the city, Sunset Lounge. We're just finishing that up for the West Palm Beach and other communities. Work here in Riviera Beach too, and that public work's very important to have.
Yeah,
that.
I was gonna say that that tip someone gave you.
Yep.
Like two things. That information that they gave you. Speak a little bit more about how much it changed the perspective of the business, and also how important is it for you to do that now?
You know, and it was really a game changer, because to be honest with you, and I'll share this with you, I had just met. This was back in around 95. I just met Donald Trump at the time, and through a friend of mine, Wes Blackman, who used to work for the city as a planner, and he went to work for Mr. Trump to convert the house to a club. And I had just, we had beaten a couple of other firms, my dad and I, and got the assignment to work at Mar-a-Lago. And it was because my dad did these beautiful renderings with palm trees and buildings. And Mr. Trump said, whoa, those are beautiful palm trees. You know, I want you to, you know, I love the work. Keep working with us, you know. And so I shared this with Dean Ellis, the county architect. And he says, you know, Rick, that's great that you have work for a big guy like that, right? But just keep in mind, that that there'll be times when he won't have work to do, and which is true, or other private work. You should definitely go and apply here for Palm Beach County work. And that was like, I still remember the thought, saying, oh, maybe he's right. Maybe it's not a bad idea, And I got a couple of projects with the city of West Palm, a couple of park projects with Palm Beach County, small projects, back in '92 and '93, and so slowly started building the public sector work, which was not easy. I mean, you're small minority business, and you're competing. Most architectural firms were very large, very well established at the time, and to get a lucky break, even on Clematis Street, our first building, the Harris Music Loft, which is an apartment complex that we did back in '93, '94. It was a bigger firm had it, but they didn't want to deal with the mess of dealing with a historic building. And I just jumped all over that just to get a shot. So being, talking to Nancy Graham, hey, introduce me to the Boston developer who bought the building.
So relationships was big for you.
Relationships always is very important when you're starting a business. You've got to be knocking the door. You work after hours, but if you have a breakfast to go to or a lunch, right, or a chamber meeting, you got to be out there. You got to be meeting people. You can't be timid, you can't be shy, so, but you have to be good at what you do. Like in our business, in our field of architecture, there are big firms, and there are a lot of little lone wolf, 1 or 2 man firms. That's very hard because a 1-man firm has to, draw the drawings, send the invoices, go collect the money, go find, but I like my size. We've always fiddled between 17 and 24 people. It's a good size where multiple people do multiple things. We work like a team, like an orchestra. So it's really good to have that. You have to have people looking for work, like myself, Ricardo, and other people managing the work. My partner, Manny, does a great job with that, and then having serious senior project managers that can then get the work done, so
what is like, what are a couple of tips that you would give someone that's in business or starting a business that they need that you weren't probably told when you first got started?
Oh boy. I wish in college they would have taught more business class. I think that's really one thing that was lacking both, and I went to 4 schools. I went to 1 year in Costa Rica, 1 year in Guatemala, a year and a half in Miami, and then 2.5 in DC. And none of them had business courses, how to set up a business, right? How to
You're
run
talking about for your field.
Yeah, yes, for the field of architecture, right? Professional. There was a couple of small classes, but they never got into the weeds of like how to write a contract. Hey, if you haven't been paid in 30 days, you need to stop working or send a letter, a notice so you can get paid, because if you keep working on non-paying jobs, what's going to happen, right? There's no money, there's no gas coming in, and your car's going to run out of gas. You're not going to be able to continue to work, So learning that the hard way at the beginning, multiple times of doing work for people that did not pay their bill, when I was starting out. And because, I remember one guy was a beautiful condo project on Jupiter Island back in '89, right after a year after we started, and we drew and nothing happened. So it was a hard lesson to learn very early. Another early lesson learned was we did these 2 beautiful polo. We've done a lot of polo and equestrian projects since the late '80s. We did 2 of these for a developer and one of his clients, and he ended up getting upset with the contractor because he didn't like how the tile worked on the floor. So sued him, and then collateral damage, by association. So that was a tough lesson to learn. Luckily, knock on wood, never been to court on a project, always been able to solve. That's another thing. Don't be stubborn to the point where you can't solve a problem. It's only business. You got to remember it's business at the end of the day. It's not personal. You might think that client, is going after you. No, they're not. They're unhappy. Okay, part ways, get out of there with the minimum loss that you can get, right? And go work on your other project. Worst thing a young architect can do is go spend time in court. First of all, it's going to tear you down every morning, right? You're going to wake up with that cloud over your head, right? Dealing with court, dealing with judges and attorneys. No, man, cut that loss, cut your arm off, and then go focus on finding 2 or 3 new jobs, right? And move on. We tend to, our profession is a very noble profession, and it takes a lot of sweat and tears. You really put into it a lot. Sometimes I use a I love to use my dolphins, as a way to say, you're like, you got a new year, you got a new team, and sometimes you get, and how hard those professional players train, right? Architects do the same thing. We prepare our plans very carefully, work very hard to get a successful project at the end of the day, right? A beautiful new building or a historic building renovated and saved, or a house for someone to live, or an apartment, I mean, a lot of good things that we do. And so you got to take the negative, put it in a little box and chuck it, right? And just
we'll keep it moving
forward. Don't look back, right? I mean, that's really, I think, a small business. If you can learn the business side, if you can avoid litigation and avoid getting stuck in the weeds with a problematic client, move on. There's going to be a lot more work, after that situation, So
you said something that was a real thing, man. There was no way of learning how to create the contracts, the proposals, and all these things that people have to do in business, that once you get out and you have your degree, you gotta figure those things. Like, what did you do to get to that point?
Well, one of the things that I did eventually, I had a good accountant and a good lawyer that helped me. Like, I remember, boy, now you're taking me back, right? 30 years.
1980. we know you know the year.
Oh my God. I remember the first time, I forgot her name. A lady lawyer helped our office, and she helped us set up a format, a standard contract, what pieces to have in the contract, how to use it. And we've basically been following that template for 30 years. I mean, we've tweaked it over time, but the same thing with the bookkeeping, accounts receivables, and collections and accounts payable and all those things that it's so much easier nowadays, man. Everything's on your phone, right? I mean, here's my office, right? This is my office. Everything is here. You can look at your accounts. You can look at everything. But back then, with paper and making sure that at the end of the week, everything lined up. At the end of the month, you were ready for the next month, and don't fall too far behind. Always, that was always the mantra, right? And back in the day, back in 88, 89, we had a little bit of a recession, kind of like, a soft one, like the one that we kind of supposed to be having this year, next year, right? And so being very cautious, I remember early 2000, we had another one. The big one was 2007, right? That was brutal, lost a lot of money, cut a lot of employers and employees, went down to 8 people, and thinking I'll never forget December 2007 saying, oh my God, we're never going to make it to 2008, and then never going to make it to 2009, and you fall deep in the hole. But 10 years later, things are good. Things are rocking.
How was the last hit for you guys with COVID?
COVID was very interesting. COVID, you kind of go into, I remember 2 years ago, right? March, I had just finished a really nice presentation at the Palm Beach Chamber at the Breakers. It was great timing. I just did a lecture on a trip to Havana that I did in 2016. It went great. It was late January, and then boom, right? I had to go speak in February at in Immokalee for a big historic thing. It got canceled. I remember it was like March, whatever it was, 12th or 13th, and it was bizarre, right? Because all of a sudden the whole world shut down, right? And so COVID, we went into high alert. We're, again, small group of architects in the office, weekly meetings. Okay, what are we going to work on? Let's make sure we're working on things that are going to pay. And because it was an uncharted waters, right? We were all like, okay, what do we do? And safety, luckily we had a space, very large office space, so we could spread out, and then we started to do a little bit of rotations in terms of working out of the office and in the office, but just being focused, being laser focused to make sure that we come on the other side, right? And we had bought an office space in the Guarantee building, which is a historic 100-year-old building in downtown that had been converted to office condos. So we had just bought them 2 years earlier, and we moved in April. It was across the street from Clematis. So we were on Clematis. We moved the block to Datura, and we did all new furniture, thank God, to all new systems with dividers, with separation, with glass. So it was almost like, set up
preparing for
COVID in a way, right? Our conference room had a larger section next to it that was like a reception area. We did not put pocket doors in between. We left it all open. So when we'd have meeting, instead of everybody jammed around the conference table, it was two office spaces. You know what I'm saying? So we did a lot of that just to make sure people were safe. We did have a couple of big scares, like, people getting sick, myself, twice, and many other people. But the government, came through with the PPP program, right? That was really helpful, and we stay busy. I think Keith James, the mayor of West Palm, did a great job. Keeping. They were going to shut down architecture and construction. I remember this story, and Dennis Grady, the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, and other leaders went to the mayor and said, "You can't shut down construction, man. I mean, there's too many people working in the industry." So they made it essential, and we kept working. Because if that, I'm telling you, Beethoven, that's a game that would have been like all bets are off. We're all going into foreclosure here. What God knows what. So I kept 20 people busy. And they all got their paychecks every 2 weeks, so didn't miss a beat,
That's awesome.
And then the governor too, Governor DeSantis, and that shows you, right, was great, right? A Democrat, Keith James, and a Republican DeSantis. What did they do? They were working for Florida. And then the cities of Florida, Miami, the mayor of Miami did a hell of a job. Keith in West Palm, Riviera, up and down the coast, people said, no, Florida, we're going to stay open and with carefulness, right?
Absolutely.
And did that for 2 years, right? And here we are, right?
Still flowing,
right?
So now I want to get into this legacy, because now your son's in the room with us.
Yes.
Like, I don't know if you guys have other children. You and your
four. We have four.
Yeah, four. Which another thing, because I want to talk about the importance of your wife being part of the business.
Yes.
Because you saw your mom doing it and working in the business with your father. Now your wife started off with you, working with you and building this business with you. Speak a little bit about that.
Yeah. So Brigitte's been with us working now over 2 years. She was working for Dave Arenberg, state attorney's office, there for quite a while. I think 17 years or something like that. But then, when COVID hit, she was a lawyer in Colombia, and she wanted to get her licensing here in the States, which is very difficult when you study abroad, any profession, architect, accountant, attorney. And she did that for a while, but then everything shut down, all the schools, so she couldn't do that. And she started by volunteering, coming in to help. The big move that I told you from Clematis to Detroit.
Yeah, I didn't even know you guys moved from there.
Oh my God! And we had, Offer Up is great, by the way. She
was the Offer Up queen.
She did all of that. Remember, Ricardo, and she was there for a couple of months. We were in the new office. She was in the old office, just meeting people and
getting it done.
Selling stuff for 20 cents on the dollar, right? Just to empty the old space, because it was a rental space, and we had to return it. And that was great when we finally walked in one day and she showed me the office was clean and empty, and that's it. Sign the space away, and then focus in the future, right? Our new space, So and she runs the office now. She's our office manager,
which is amazing. I think I want to touch on with that the legacy of having your children involved with the business now.
Yes.
Speak a little bit about that.
Yes. If I may, before that,
please, go ahead.
Just a little detail. We had structural change this year. So, my partner for 20 years, after my dad, he retired, for 20 years, I had a partner, Colin Price, a South African guy, nice guy. He retired in January. My assistant for 10 years, Darcy Ann Henry, retired after 10 years because of COVID. She got nervous with COVID, and her husband, being older, in his 70s. So she said, you know what? I'm in my 60s. I need to go do something else. My accountant died from cancer in February, right? So we had structural, massive structural, and then my father died in July.
Wow!
And Ricardo joined us in April 1st, and it was his wish, by the way. He said, he reached out to me.
He's crazy.
He's crazy. Just like when I went to school, by the way, because my dad said to me, "Now you don't have to go to architecture school," and my mom said the same thing. You can study if you want to be a biologist, go do that. You sure you want to be an architect? Don't do it because we're telling you. Do it because you love it or you want to do it. So he came to me and he said the same thing. He said, no, I want to help the business. I've seen what you and Grandpa have done. I want to keep the legacy going. And that made me very proud and very happy, because, you do spend, your life, a lot of sweat and tears in the business. And even though I have a great young partner in Manny, he's 15 years younger than me, so he can carry on. It's good to have the family name, involved still in the process, right? And I say to Ricardo, he's actually smarter because he didn't study architecture. He studied business. So now he's involved in the business of architecture, which is helping to make us more successful. And so he's a fast learner. He's been with us now 6 months, and I see him and Manny eventually, leading the firm. And I would love to eventually take a secondary position, and continue to do what I really love to do, which is to talk about historic places in Florida, with historic preservation, outreach, maybe a little bit of teaching, maybe continue to find those kind of projects, continue to be a rainmaker for the office, but be able to spend some more time on the future, on the history of Florida, because it's under threat. There's the good news and there's bad news, right? There's too much development going on, and very little of it is of very good quality. Like when things were built 100 years ago, which was very high quality. Now it's reversed. Now we have a lot of low quality and very little high quality. So I want to be able to, while I still can breathe and talk and think, remind people of what a great state we have, and let's not overbuild it or overpave it. Make sure we have room for our natural environment and our historic resources too.
So you said there is good and bad. Could you speak a little bit about? I want to know a little bit about both about that, bro.
Okay, so good and bad. Good things, for example, Clematis Street, right? I mean, 30 years ago was a dangerous place, right? Most of urban Palm Beach County was dangerous, right? Both here on the coast and out in the glades, right? That's the bad part. The good part is that it slowly has changed, right, to a very nice positive. West Palm Beach has stabilized quite a bit, and Clematis is growing. Another little bit of bad is some of the historic buildings are being changed in not a good way. They're not being done properly. So we're losing some of the historic character of West Palm Beach. And so that's important to protect that. Like they do, for example, in Palm Beach, they do a hell of a job protecting their historic buildings. So we could learn from Palm Beach in West Palm. Changes in places like Lake Worth, where it's been stagnant, but now the Gulfstream Hotel's coming back, and they're doing good things in Lake Worth, and down in Boynton Beach, where we do a lot of work too. Boynton Beach and Riviera Beach I call them the sisters that got left behind, right? But now they're like, everybody is just rediscovering Boynton Beach and Riviera, and we're working in both cities in the urban core. But you see a lot of things, for example, very, very large buildings, which is I call it the Miami-fication of West Palm. And we should be very careful with that, that we don't become a city of huge parking structures with huge buildings above, because really city life is made from the ground level to maybe 5-6 stories. That's what the human eye can see and deal with, And so having good buildings, active buildings that have windows facing the streets that are connected, right? You hear a lot about connectivity these days, walkability, multimodal, ways of getting around cities, not have to be in a car all the time, trying to help push for more of that and less of the gold rush of Miami, where you go to Brickell or Biscayne, it's like 180-story building after another. And it's controlled chaos, but I think it's dangerous with global warming and other issues, a hurricane and other issues, the transportation issues that you have to think things out, that you have to keep a good scale in city. And I would like for Palm Beach County to continue to be a charming place. I like to think of West Palm. It's got a charming history. It's got a nice vibe to it. Water on the east, water on the west, a lot of nature. We're surrounded, Riviera has Peanut Island, Singer Island, right? We got so much nice stuff. Let's not lose it by rampant overdevelopment. Let's make sure we can do it in a reasonable manner. Why
is preserving these buildings so important?
Well, they bring soul. They have the soul of the place. And I'll give you an example. When we did the old Methodist church, which is called the Harriet, back when it was called City Place. Today it's called the Square. So the Harriet was a 1920s historic church that became, on the ground floor, we put shops and cafes, and then we did an interactive multi-purpose hall. They've had weddings, high school graduations, jazz concerts, boxing, you name it, everything in there, right? So that becomes the tie to the past. Here it is 2022, that building was built 100 years ago, and it ties you to a place. It's placemaking. It gives you this sense of place that when all you have is new, you lose your sense of place. You lose your, where did I come from, And we can learn a lot from where we came from, right? It's Riviera Beach has a history of conch settlers, right? From the islands, right? That's a very cool history, right? Colorful architecture, the design, hardworking people, you know, in the boating industry and all that. You don't want to lose all of that. You want to make sure you always have that tie because those are the roots of a place, you know. The courthouse, when we did the courthouse downtown, it was in the 70s wrapped in another building. So it was like mummified, right? So we took the wrapping apart and we put it back to its 1916 glory. It's a museum, right? The museum. And what a legacy, right? That's a legacy project because we brought something that was completely gone, restored it, cleaned it up, right? And brought it back. And now families, school kids, seniors can come and learn about our history in that building, you know? And when you come from, and like, I think I heard once, it's like 80% of people are from other parts. They're not from Palm Beach County, you know? So a lot of people coming here from different parts. It's important for them to learn what this place was like, you know? Yes. They're from Connecticut, they're from Pennsylvania, wherever they're from, you know? Okay, now you're here, you know? Invest here, spend your time and money here, but learn about our place, our history, to form our future, right? To allow us to have a positive impact on our present and to guide us to our future. You know, very important, I think. All three parts. Absolutely.
So what's next for Rick? And yeah, what's next for Rick?
What's next? Oh, boy.
So we get a little secret what's happening.
All right. Okay, off record, right?
Off record.
Okay, it's the 50th anniversary of the Dolphins.
Oh my!
We're 1-0.
Here we go. Here we go.
My four sons. I have two sons, and they're both brainwashed. Right?
I could only imagine, Rick.
Because when I was 11, they had the parade on Calle Ocho, and I could hear the parade, and I was like, "Wow!"
And you got hooked from there.
Oh, from there on, just like I got hooked in historic preservation when I was 19. Right. So those are the two loves of my life. Right.
So I could only imagine. Last week was amazing for you.
Oh, it was wonderful in that stadium, and we're season ticket holders. So we had a great time. Sweated. It was crazy, but it was fun. So what's next? Well, the firm's doing very well. We have phenomenal people. Like I told you, Manny's my partner, my vice president, and we've got a couple of associates coming online. So continue the transition the next 10 years. To be honest, Beethoven, you know, dream big. I started when I was 27. 50th anniversary would be when I'm 77, and history and anniversaries is something I can wrap my mind. So 16 years from now, it would be a 50th anniversary. I don't expect to be working all these hours, your father but my dad did. My dad did all the way to his mid-80s. So, but I'd like to be more involved in the things that I mentioned, you know, the historic preservation, the urban renewal, urban planning, you know, good architecture things, and then have the team in the office develop the projects and not have to be involved in the day-to-day, the business side of it, you know, to do more of the things that I love, you know, and whether it's, I'm involved with a couple of historic preservation activities at the University of Florida, both at St. Augustine and up in Nantucket. They have an institute for historic preservation. And so I love to continue to do that in that. It's a great university, right? They're all over the world. Now they say, you know, the University of Florida is everywhere, right? And they're coming to West Palm, right? They're building a big campus in downtown West Palm. Maybe they'll have architecture and historic preservation, and I could get involved with that too. You know, and watch the firm, watch Manny and Ricardo, you know, take the firm to the next level. I've told them, you know, it's your oyster. You know, if you want to go from 20 to 50, have at it, right? You know, I'm just, I'll give you my guidance. I'll give you the best of my experience, right? Because that's how businesses transition. And I want to see them successful for the next 50 years. I think that would be a wonderful legacy.
I think you got it, Rick, man. Okay, man. Great job, man. Everything you're doing, keep on doing it. Can't wait to see what Ricky create for you. For this podcast you'll be creating soon called History with Rick. Okay. See you later. I own the name right, so don't forget that now. Have a good day, bro.
All right, thank you very much. Rick. Thank you.
See you guys later.
All right.